My name is Anthony Simeonov. This is my 4th year as a PhD student at MIT. I work in the general area of robotic manipulation, and more specifically on trying to use machine learning techniques to build perception systems that allow manipulation capabilities to be more general purpose. So if we have this goal of learning something about the geometry of the objects that we're going to manipulate in a way that's task agnostic and doesn't actually have to do with what we want to do with the objects, what are some ways to do that? So our method of using neural descriptor fields, it kind of starts out from the perspective that a reasonable thing to do if you want to help the robot learn something about geometry would be to give it the ability to imagine whole entire shapes just from observing some observations of shapes that it can get from cameras. When you train these, they're called occupancy networks, these neural networks that can perform 3D reconstruction from point clouds, is that the internal representations that the neural networks learn so as to be able to perform that reconstruction task, they actually encode some pretty reasonable and useful semantic information about the objects in the category. So what that looks like is that if I've trained this neural network to look at point clouds and then reconstruct whole entire shapes, and now I take that neural network and I ask, okay, what is the internal feature representation of a point near the handle, let's say, of some mug? And now I take a new mug and I search for, okay, of all the points that are in the vicinity of this new mug, which is the point that has its own feature representation that's most similar to that point that I queried near the handle? We build a special mathematical property into the neural network, which is called equivariance. And it's a fancy term that essentially means that if I apply rotations to the shapes, the representation kind of rotates sensibly with the shape. We are able to now see an example of what our NDF system can do. We've given it some demonstrations of how we want it to grasp mugs by the rim and hang them on our rack via the handle. And so now we can show an example of what it looks like for us to have looked at this new mug that we've put in the environment and have it figure out where it wants to pick it up, how it should move it to hang it. And we've run that procedure and run the planning algorithm, so the robot is ready to execute what it thinks it should do that matches what we taught it. So let's see what it does. So we see here for the first step, it's coming down and it's figuring out this is where the rim is, this is a good spot for me to put my fingers. That's similar to what was shown in the examples that we showed in the demos. Looks pretty good. And now we see how it's decided to translate and reorient the mug to try to place it on the rack. And we see, okay, there we go. It got the handle of the mug at the right spot on the rack so that it can let it go and put it where it wants to. Okay, so I'll give like a little example of what it would look like for me to provide a demonstration of the task that I want of hanging the mug on the rack. So we have some mug that we'll use for the demonstrations. We have these 2 cameras here that take the depth images of the mug and convert that into a 3D point cloud. So we'll first put the mug in the environment and get some pictures of it. And then the way that we'll teach the robot what we want it to do is we'll actually put it into a mode where we can just move it around ourselves. And then record, okay, so this is going to be a location that I would like the robot to execute a grasp relative to the mug that we've seen. So we see that this is something that's near the rim. So I'm going to record that and now actually execute the grasp, and now it's holding the mug. And once I've done that, I can come around and similarly show how I want it to place the mug in the environment. So I come here, and this will be the second location that I record for the pose of the gripper. And that now consists of one demonstration of picking up a mug by the rim, hanging it on the rack via the handle. And essentially all we need is like 5 of those on a couple of different mugs with different shapes. And that's what allows us to now execute that same task on new mugs that have both different shapes, but also different poses.